So my thing, right, that I focus on the most is the Christianity in relationship to anarchism and like that understanding of the world. And so I think that like for me, that paradoxical nature of faith as something that is intrinsic, like doubt is intrinsic to faith. I
Mhm.
think that having those reversals instead of 100% kind of like prima facie just accepting the base level of things, I think is like integral to understanding any kind of complexity in terms of
Absolutely.
faith at all.
Hi, my name's leowt, and you have found your way to the Conversations Podcast. Conversations exist to create spiritually minded conversations about life. We desire to create safe space for dialogue and community. We desire to come together regularly and intentionally to generate conversations about life, belief, and the intersection of the two. Everyone is welcome at the conversation.
All right, friends, it's Leo WT here back with another episode of Conversations. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time listening to me chop it up with people that I find interesting. If this is your first time here, hi, how are you? We get together once a week to have intentional, spiritually minded conversations about life, belief, and the intersections of the two. And absolutely everyone's voice is welcome as a part of the conversation. If you know me, you know Leo WC, you know I like to shake things up a little bit and kind of turn them on their ear. And so today I have recruited a digital confidant of mine who I actually met through one of my classes this year at grad school. And we're going to be doing a little bit of a different take on Christianity. My TikTok blew up last week, and one of people's favorite comments was like, "Oh, you're not a Christian," or "Prove it to us." And I'm like, since when did like I owe you that? You know what I'm saying? When I'm coming to you as a person who is admittedly religious and engaging in, multiple decades of spiritual education. And so I want to talk to my dear friend here. My video is mirrored. Oh, there we go. I want to talk to this guy about some different takes on Christianity that you might not have heard of. So I'm going to let my friend introduce themselves and then we'll get started.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Hunter Sanders. I'm studying for my Master's of Sacred Theologies at Chicago Theological Seminary. I'm currently a teacher living in Oklahoma, but largely I think religiously, that's kind of like my area of study. And so thinking about new radical theologies or ways of, cognating the Christ person, Christianity generally. That's kind of what I do. So
I
I'm
love it.
happy to be here, happy to talk about it.
I love it. Part of what I've been saying to people recently, especially part of the dialogue I've been trying to develop and help foster, is the idea that some people say, I don't take my faith serious enough, or how can you say you're a Christian if this, that, or the other? But do you really take your faith and what you believe seriously if you don't push back against it? You know what I mean? And so
Right.
for me, I'm trying to push on the edges of my faith and my understanding of theology and my understanding of morality and life and all of that. I'm constantly trying to push on it because I don't want to have let myself be boxed in some way that's not intentional.
Right. Yeah, I had a conversation with a guy this last week. Actually, we were talking about I was talking about my study and stuff and why I was doing it and whatever. And I think for him, it seemed that it was very I think for a lot of people, questioning it is something that's kind of taboo in and of itself,
Yes.
because I don't think that they see the processes of faith as something that's changing or organic. And I think that just opening that up like for interrogation, I think is like such an important thing, because just so many people that I'm even like close to, right, that's not something on their radar in terms of what
Exactly.
they're
Yeah,
looking
I
into.
never grew up with that. If you questioned, you were doubting Thomas and you were somehow
Yeah,
bad. But
right.
like, should I really be able to buy into something blindly that people can wield with such power that it can inspire holy war, which is a phrase I kind of choke on. But do I want
Yeah,
to just blindly buy in when someone can utilize this structure known as faith or religion? I can't just buy into something and just trust that what they said is okay, because that's anti-intellectual and it's intellectual dishonesty, in my
yeah.
opinion.
And yeah, and I would agree because like so my thing right that I focus on the most is um the Christianity in relationship to anarchism and like that understanding of the world. And so I think that like for me, that paradoxical nature of faith as something that is intrinsic, like doubt is intrinsic to faith. I
Mhm.
think that having those reversals instead of 100% kind of like prima facie just accepting the base level of things, I think is like integral to understanding any kind of complexity in terms of
Absolutely.
faith at all. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, it's to use a kind of somewhat crude analogy. It's like going from the 4-pack of crayons they give you at the restaurant to like
Yeah.
the 96-pack with the dope
Yeah.
ass sharpener. Like it's a whole different world. Like you could have the 4-pack, but
And then you get Timberwolf, right?
exactly.
That's my favorite color. It's
I
gray,
love
but it's
it.
a special gray. It's just
I
slightly off.
love that you have a favorite Crayola.
Oh, I for sure do. Yeah,
I
no,
love
no
it.
doubt.
I like that you talked about Christian anarchy because that's what I really wanted to drill into a little bit with you because folks don't actually realize that this is a thing. I
Yeah,
think people too oftenly conflate religion and politics, and in that you end up with a straight white landowning male on a
yeah,
war vessel, using the book of Isaiah to be pumped up about how the USA just dropped bombs on the Middle East. Like
yeah,
Christianity is not that, but somehow in our thinking, we have like got, the empire and the Bible have gotten in bed together. And I love that you come at all of your thought processes in a way that challenges that, right? And I'm so
yeah.
pumped that you are nerdy about that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I think the thing is I mean, because you're saying, it's something that people do not engage with or think of even as an option. And I think the main like not only is it Christian anarchy, I think like even just the idea of anarchism generally, I
Mhm.
think is something that's, I mean, it's immediately frowned upon in nearly every circle, every news outlet, every political discourse. And I think it's because there is a degree of misunderstanding of kind of straw manning of
Mhm.
anarchism and that kind of political philosophy, because you'll watch the news. I remember whenever protests after George Floyd, there was a point where I was out marching and my wife was at home. She has like a heart condition, can't do
Mhm.
that, but she was texting me updates, and about what was being said on the news versus like what was happening.
Mhm.
And I think, and so like on the news, there was this thing where people were saying, there's anarchy, there's chaos. And I think that that's usually the way that people go about it. They think that it's either lack of structure or lack of kind of care or even a lack of morality generally, when from my understanding, anarchy is something that is inherently moralistic.
Mhm.
It is a moral standpoint, and
Yeah.
it's specifically morally driven. And so yeah, I mean, because anarchism, I mean, I don't want to like I'm just gonna get into it. So like
Yeah, go for it.
yeah, sure, yeah. So anarchism basically, like if we were to if we're talking about its existence in the world as it actually is and ought to be, it's kind of like communism in some ways, in the sense that like the philosophy comes from some Marxist thought,
Mhm.
but those philosophies are enacted in the world pre-Marx, the actual thinkers which write them down and
Mhm.
codify them. They are observed forms of community,
Mhm.
and largely they are formed around a basis of mutual aid,
Mhm.
and a lack of hierarchy.
Mhm.
Uh, and what that does is that serves to exclude exploitation as a possibility.
Right.
And so even though we may observe, and I think this is what's so attractive about whenever we observe it in the Bible, is that the Bible itself has no conception of capital. It does not use those words. It has no conception of economics, but it does have a conception of exploitation.
Mhm.
And it is strictly against exploitation. And it also has concepts of hierarchy,
Mhm.
which it is strictly against in a lot of ways. So, or at least the Christ person, as we understand Jesus. So yeah. So I think that all of Christian anarchic thought has to come from the standpoint of finding its legitimacy in the Christ person, but also understanding it as a political ideology that can be enacted outside of current governmental establishment, and how to rethink those workings in a Christian mindset. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting that you mentioned pause. It feels like we're in a discussion forum for one of our classes, because I always would start off with like, it's so interesting that you mentioned, or I love how you said, you know.
Yeah. Hey, no, it's good. I mean, I'll say that's the way that like I talk. My my friends, like, they'll make fun of me because I talk in paragraphs. So
I like it. I am with that. I am totally with that. I vibe with that. But I really like that you brought up that the Bible doesn't have a conception of, you know, capital, because I plan to do another episode on this in the near future, but capitalism, it's what we do in America. And so in so many ways, like American evangelicalist capitalism is almost the antithesis of Christian anarchy. And yet they both would define themselves within the same, drawing from the same person, you know, the same religious text. But I really feel like the idea, capitalism in general, the idea of empire, those ideas, I think, do violence to the ideas that are presented in the Bible, you know?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, because I mean, I think a lot of the kind of capitalist propaganda, especially with the church, it has a lot to do with a kind of like permissiveness. It's kind of that it wasn't expressly mentioned, and so we're going to say that it's okay. When the better, deeper thing would be to say what is similar and how does it affect those, like how does Jesus and his followers, how do they interact with those other things? And like for instance, I think a great example would be like you know, the whole, you know, coins, whenever they're talking about paying your taxes, right? They say should we pay to Rome, right? They're exploitative power, whatever. I think that a lot of people will take that passage and they'll say, you know, like Jesus says, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? And a lot of people will say, pay your taxes, right? You know, it's just very straightforward. You give your money. But whenever you look at what he's actually saying, a lot of what he does is actually deflecting and saying, this is not the question you should be asking, right? Like, it's give unto Caesar and to Caesar's is not just pay your taxes. It's not buy into what's going on. It's saying your money is not yours. Don't worry about, you're right. It has to do with ownership fundamentally. It's saying Caesar owns this, give that back to him, because that's not your concern. And so I think that for a lot of those passages, I think that they're just taken based on the easiest translation or the easiest interpretation or just the quickest one. And I think largely, if we contextualize those things historically, it's much deeper. You know?
Absolutely. And that's so frustrating to me, because I mean, as a queer Christian, I've been fighting to validate myself for 12 years now. Fun fact, 12 years ago today, I came out as a lesbian, and we've obviously turned some corners since then. But you know, the first of my 4 coming outs were you know, was 12 years ago. So I've been used to exegeting. For those of you who are watching, exegeting means like letting the text speak to you through its context, not putting your context onto the text. So I was really trying to study to see what the scripture was saying about me as a person. And it really changed things when I took things out of a context that I didn't even know I was programmed into. Like, I was programmed into straight white American evangelicalism, capitalism, Republican, rural. Like, I was programmed all those ways. And I'm not saying they're all bad. I'm just saying they were there subconsciously, right? And so when I started to have to deconstruct so as to understand myself, that's when I started to be like, wait, I think that there's something amiss here. You know what I mean? And I think that that's something that Christian anarchy in particular brings to the forefront, is kind of I hate to say primal, but it was a fundamental, elemental part of Christianity that we've lost. And so now some parts just seem crazy.
Yeah, a great example of the fundamental aspect of this is kind of there's a portion that I've actually heard a lot of people use to actually kind of condemn that kind of communistic or anarchic understanding, and it's the passage where I believe Paul is talking about. I want to say it's Paul. I don't have anything in front of me to determine, but we all know the passage. It's the one where he's talking about working with your own hands, right?
Oh yeah.
Yes, and I think that, and the thing is like people take that as like do your own work, get your own wage. But instead, what we actually see is a lot of communal ownership, separate from governmental powers, separate from those other systems of care of people caring for each other, and largely in resistance to the government. The government wanted them to be dependent on them, but they created systems of care between themselves. But what he's saying is not, hey, you get your wage for your earnings, don't take from other people. What he's saying is, you make sure that you are working so that nobody can look down on the way that you're sharing communally. Because I think one of the biggest ways of people talking, against mutual aid or whatever is, why should someone else who's not working get what I'm getting? And I think that what he's saying there is the basic defense is, let's make sure that no one can say that, and a lot of what he does is say, in his other letters, when he's talking about head coverings, things like that, is like, let's make sure that like if they are doing this and they consider this to be moral, that we are at least that we are beyond reproach in terms of the common arguments against what we're doing.
Absolutely.
And so I think that like, yeah. So digging deeper into the fundamentals of those things is saying that like there was a point where Paul says it is so important that we can keep these communal sharing means of ownership, that we keep this the way that it is, that you make sure that you're working so that we never lose this. That's how fundamental it was to the early church. And so like to see that now just go away so quickly is because I mean, within the first, second, third centuries, right, that's completely gone in favor of like feudal lords and things like that. So the fundamental aspect of it is important. And I think that what you said about the exegesis part of it, right, you don't want to inform onto it. And I think that a lot of times whenever I explain it to people, the thing that I want to make sure to keep away from is to say, I valued anarchism first, and then I value, because I think that for me, it came from, there was Christ. And then I discovered a political ideology which matched up with the thing that I found in Christ.
Yes.
And which I found in the church. And so I think starting from that baseline is very important because obviously I don't think that you would have really any backup, or you wouldn't have any reason to do, right? If you're saying this is Christian anarchism. If it starts out as anarchism, it's anarchism which is Christian. It's not fundamentally Christian, right? Like it's more so anarchism. So I think that keeping it with the Christian aspect and where we're actually deriving those things from, I think is like incredibly important to understanding it.
It's a big difference because it's almost like it's the source of it, right? Like the source of your ideology came from your understanding of religion and of your belief system, right? And that's it seems like a nuanced difference, but it's not, because especially when you're talking about Christian anarchism, like I personally am of the opinion that if you are comfortable with American evangelism, capitalistic mentality, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, I think you missed the whole damn point of the book.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, did you read the Bible ever? I get that question all the time. And I'm like, bitch, I read it in 5 languages, 2 of which were the originals. Like, come at me when you're trying to defend the King James Version. Okay, let's move past this,
Yes. And there is there's no room for individualism, which in a religion which centers a man who emptied himself to such a degree that he took on all of the actions of the entire world, right? And maybe that's like kind of, I have different, I don't want to get into atonement theology or whatever right now, but let's just say, in some way emptied himself to such a degree that became victor over, sin, death, life, whatever, apotheosized, became God. I think that that there isn't any individualism in that. There's one individual and everyone else is supposed into that, right? And the goal is to kind of come into that community. And so I think that individualism is so alien from
Mhm.
that entire mode of thinking. I don't think that it's, yeah, I would totally agree.
Absolutely. Like, I love that point too, because it's a bringing into, and I
Right.
feel like that's the nature, like that's why we constantly see Jesus in the, the context or the motif of breaking bread with people. Like, Jesus is
Yeah.
bringing people in. And when you start to get into that, like capitalistic, super political modern day understanding of things, it becomes so much easier to exclude. And
Yeah.
that's like, Jesus was never in the process of excluding. And so here's a big theological difference that we encounter when we push up against the edges of the scriptures, or what we've been told the scriptures say. Like, I take it serious enough to think that, primarily, I think the Bible was God inspired, but I think it was written by man, and then it was translated by man, and then it was translated by man. So I think there's some good stuff in there, but I think we've got to really drill down into what's actually happening and get back to the real heart of it, and take it out of the hands of the, straight, white, cis, male, landowning,
Yeah.
Republican people, whatever, like the people in power. The Bible
Right.
wasn't written for them or by them, right?
Yeah.
We got to get it back to the point where, hey, we're all in this together fighting the man, essentially,
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, I don't know if you were, I don't know if you were in this class. I can't remember which ones it was, but
Yes.
I feel like we had like the same conversations. Like I don't know. I just feel like I was, yeah. Anyway, but I think that there was one where we were talking about the Deuteronomist and the ways that the Old Testament is kind of the way we understanding the order and structure of that, and also the way that we understand the priesthood's influence over that text.
Yeah.
I think that is a great example, because we have this instance where the way that it's written is for a particular purpose of promoting priestly interest, right? But I think that even when we look at, I think that a lot of people would say, well, for the majority of Christian history, we do not have these anarchic communities. I think that we can observe those in certain instances, and the ways that power plays to subvert those things, and then things actually get dicey. So, you have the original text for the Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, those things get edited, and then they get changed for a particular purpose. With Christian history, we have this situation where we have small individuals going off to deserts, beginning to read scriptures, separating themselves from establishment, creating communities where they farm and create their own means of production and share those with each other freely. And then that's superseded by feudal lords coming in, a lot of and we would call that monasticism. And then these people come in and they start establishing dowries, right? So you can't get into the monastery if you're just anybody. You have to pay a certain fine, because at that point we don't have state power, right? But we have kind of a corporate power. We have hierarchy of a different sort. So and I think that's the difference between communism and anarchy, particularly, and why it works for Christianity as opposed to communism, is because communism says that state power is ultimately beneficial to that sharing and ultimately to that redistribution. But what anarchism would suggest is that it doesn't go far enough in that state. The state powers can also co-opt that kind of exploitation.
I see the line you're making there, for sure.
Yeah. And so I think that for us, it's the thing where you're moving away. We see these instances throughout history, even though there is a predominant narrative that is saying it doesn't exist, but it does exist at certain times. But the reason that it goes away is because those other non-anarchic capitalistic powers, perhaps feudal at the time, or the powers that would become capitalistic, those things take over. And so those things do exist throughout our history.
They've been popping up all along. Like, if you go back to the early history of the church, I mean, like, for those of you who are watching, this was something I just studied this semester, so I'm really passionate about it, and I'm actually in the process of authoring a book entitled Queering Church. Don't try to write one titled that, or I'll chop your fingers off. But my fundamental thesis of the book is that the church was always queer, and by queer I mean it was not categorizable, right? Queer means tearing down any unnatural binary division. The church existed sit in the fields, at the shepherd's altar, out in the forest, in someone's home, in a little shrine. Like that's how it started. And I think that these different pockets of communities, be them nuns, be them, Beheens, be them monks, be them, even modern day communal living communities, like that people, I know is really big in evangelicalism to have like a community house stuff. There are pockets of church communities that have always existed based on this communal sharing of resources and coming together and group ownership. And that has consistently happened throughout church history. But because it threatens the American system of capitalism, we're just going to cover over that. We're just going to push them off to the side or call them a heretic or call them an apostate or just in general say it didn't work. And you know what I mean? But those types of communities keep popping up throughout church history if you really look seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I would bring it back to, I mean, I don't mean to like bring up Marx too very much, but like, I think that like a big part of, Marxist thought is not necessarily that this is something that he's not suggesting that he's not creating anything new. Mm-hmm. He's saying this is an observable fact. Communism happens. Mm-hmm. Anarchism happens. Mm-hmm. The problem is that the struggle between anarchism and like the bourgeoisie, right, or the state powers always creates these crises because the state powers are going to exploit in such a way as to prevent it. So the thing is this will always happen. This will always occur, and it's always going to create crises in any community. But it's going to be until you eliminate those exploitative powers above, you're going to keep having those crises. You keep having, he brought up, the feudal lords. The peasants would revolt, right? Because you've created a system of constantly operating at surplus for greedy purposes. And then that creates a crisis with the workforce. So they will uprise, right? It will create a crisis, things will reform, and then it'll take a different form entirely. So I think that for this is like Christian, I think that anarchy is so as kind of this communal, anti-capitalist, anti-state form is so fundamental to Christianity that it will continually be a part of its history and continually come up until it is the full picture of what we do as Christians.
It's almost like it keeps bubbling to the surface because it's there, right? Like you can't deny it's there. You can't shut it down because it's the base of it all. Yeah.
I mean, I would even like, I think that there are some ways that, ideology, people will talk about, hey, this is a very ideological form, right? This is a very, when, there are many systems, many other like ways to, I think that people don't recognize the degree of diversity within those trains of thought. There isn't one anarchism, there are many of them. But I think that one thing, I think that I wouldn't even shy away from that because I think that Christianity, I think it has those ideological, at times even impractical ways of going about radical love and radical compassion, because I think you see Jesus breaking bread with a certain amount of bread, right? He has a certain degree of material and he distributes it into an impossible amount of people. And I think that the idea, I think we constantly see this this push from the Christ to give in times of impossibility, right? I think that even in particular in capitalist societies where there is little, I think that there is still a great incentive, at least from a Christian standpoint, to enact that compassion regardless of what it costs us personally. And so I think it's recommendable at all times. I think that people get too focused on what can we do practically instead of what can we imagine to do instead, and what can we attempt.
I love that too, because there's so much, one of the things I come up against a lot in just my level, my existence is essentially revolution. Like just me breathing in the morning is something revolutionary that I need to protect in some level. But in my course of existence and kind of like challenging a specific evangelical pastor in town and a specific ideology that's pretty common in American capitalism. Like the idea is we're about charity, but we don't give to those who are lazy. You know what I mean? I heard those specific words from a pastor in a pulpit. It's a couple hundred feet that way. And I heard that and I was like, what in the fuck? I
Yeah, it's like,
never read
no,
that in any Bible verse.
give to the lazy. Like, I don't see why. Yeah, because I think that like there is that degree of like sin where like we are like shaming people, and I say we just very generously,
Yeah.
but like, you know, I think it's like that that focus of saying like we protect the good people
Mhm.
and we alienate the bad one. And I think that what that does is that keeps bad people bad, and that, you know, and it doesn't bring anyone in or offer anyone support.
Yep.
You know, we see that with like prosecution, the prison industrial complex, right? We see
Mhm.
like punitive systems do not work. Accountability works,
Right.
but punitive stuff doesn't work. And largely, and I think, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because what that shows is that poverty is not some natural thing that
Mhm.
occurs. It is a punishment, right, for particular people.
Yep.
It's we have, you know, I live in Oklahoma. I live in Oklahoma City. Grew up in Tulsa. We recently had, I believe it was the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
What that does, what that event does, is it creates generational wealth
Yes.
within white communities, and it robs it of black communities.
Mhm.
And so all poverty in Tulsa among black individuals is a direct punishment for being black, right? Like,
Yes.
so I think that, and you'll find this anywhere, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's not, you can look at any town, any system, any degree of redlining, right? Any southern city will have it. A lot of northern cities will have it.
Yep.
Like it is just like the systems that we have. The capitalist, you know, the ideology says this is what you get for being good. This is what you
Mhm.
get for behaving. This is what you get for being, you know, working hard.
Yep.
But in actuality, it's these are the way, right? These are the people that we approve of. These are the
Yep.
people that we disapprove of.
Yep.
And we are not going to care. And I think what anarchy does is it allows people to find that, especially Christian anarchy, is we can find that we can find those people valuable. Those people can find value in of themselves, but they can care for themselves, right? The
Yes.
anarchy creates autonomy. It allows them to not only they can care for their own community without informing on others. And I
Mhm.
think what that does is it deprives people of, right? I think that there's people ignore the passage that talks about there's no slave nor free, right?
Yeah.
There is no largely that passage goes on to say that there's no nationality, right?
Mhm.
If we break these things up, is those borders, those systems, right? um those are exploitative hierarchies, right?
Mhm.
That we, if by saying there's no slave or no free, you're saying there is no slave class, there is no class that's dependent on another class in order to receive their living, right? So that
Mhm.
they don't have to ask permission to live. Same
Mhm.
thing with gender, right? There is not a gender that requires another gender's approval in order to live, in order
Yep.
to thrive, in order to flourish. And I think that all of those things are present. And I think that ignoring that, just saying that this is the natural way, I think it's just a farce. You know, it's
Mhm.
just nobody. It's not the way that things are materially in any way. And I
Yeah,
think that
because it's not empowering autonomy, and then it's
no,
punishing you for not being autonomous.
yeah,
It's a double negative in a
yeah,
sense. You know what I mean? And
right,
I think that, you know, what from the argument that you're making, which I happen to be pretty persuaded with already,
yeah,
is an almost a kind of compassionate autonomy that is generated because of Christian anarchic thought, right?
for
Like,
sure,
we believe in your ability to support yourself and to be a vital part of this community, and it's non-punitive. Like, you just get to exist and be valuable. And of course, there are always people in society who are going to struggle. We're
yeah,
always going to have people who can't make the grade, so to speak. We're going to have people who, by their own right, or, you know, just natural selection kind of thing, like freak of nature, whatever genetic anomaly, are going to be, you know, differently abled or have, you know, mental health issues. Or, I mean, maybe are some people just born bad? I don't know. Is that a possibility? There's always going to be a fray, but
sure.
I think
And
that right now the fray is demonized.
yeah, and I mean the thing is like ultimately that those things, right? They do not uh like matter so much to the way that most people function or should function. So we
Exactly.
would say, you know, right, to each according to their need, right? everyone provides in order, like, I forget the actual quote, but you know what I'm quoting. It's essentially that, like, everyone gets what they require and everyone gives what they can. And if you cannot give, then you don't give, right?
Right.
You give what you are able to give. And so I think that with those things, like those, so let's say that we had, I actually have, let's see, where to go. Oh, it's way up there. I think there's a book called, I think it's What About the Rapists, right?
Okay.
It's about, if you were to eliminate the prison industrial complex, right? What would you do with those people? And what that does is it suggests methods of accountability in certain communities. And that's been a huge part of the political thought of anarchism for a long time. But I think Christianity is geared towards answering this question because it's interpersonal. It provides solutions for those things. It requires accountability. It is inherently concerned with the improvement of individuals and growth of change, of learning about yourself. And I think that ultimately you brought up too, there's the degree to which people have this autonomy and they're able to take care of themselves, and how Christianity is perfectly suited for that. I think that one thing to note too about it is that with Christian anarchy, because anarchy is so, I'm not going to inform on you, right? We're going to inform together. I think that a important piece of that is to go forward in such a way as to not require other people to be a part of the Christianity first before you create those systems of care, right? And I think that we find in the Bible, right, we see all these ways of people creating those communities and also providing for each other very materially.
Yes.
And I think that if we expand, I think that we largely think of it as something that's thought, right? I technically believe that Jesus is the Son of God, right? But I think we have entirely ignored all of the material suggestions for how we should live, right? We look at the poor and we give to the poor. We take our money. We do not give services. We don't give, right? I mean, you can, but we don't set them down. We don't set them up on a kind of program for addiction or whatever. Like, you can do that. You can do those things. But ultimately, that has to do with their belief. And if you are not providing for their physical needs first, right? People being fed is Jesus's first concern. People being healed is Jesus's first concern. And all of those things are very tactile. And so I think that for us, it's expanding Christian thought to not just be ideological and not just be this kind of otherworldly, right? But saying that it actually exists here. It actually exists now. We can create systems which benefit people and cause them to flourish in ways that God would approve of, right? I think that is intrinsic to, and I think that cooperating with other people who are already on that journey is a very Christian thing to do, even if they themselves do not identify as Christian.
And so that's the part that I wanted to really highlight of what you just said, is that there's no prerequisite and there's no presupposition, because some churches will say, sick people, or the hospital doesn't exist for healthy people. The church doesn't exist for saved people, right? We want the sinners, right? But there's a presupposition that you will change your stance at some point to align with this. And that's why, that's why I absolutely cannot fucking tolerate, just like accepting churches. Motherfucker, I don't want to be accepted. I want to be celebrated, because you're trying to bring me in, you're trying to hook me in and then change me. And that's not what I'm about. That's not what I'm about at all. And I don't think that's what the gospel was about. The gospel wasn't like, give that homeless person a sandwich and then talk to them about the Bible so that they get saved. No, it's just like, give them a sandwich, right? And just actually live out the gospel. They don't need the homily, you know?
I mean, and like fundamental to the concepts of eternity. I mean, and this is the frustrating thing too, is that all of these things are present within like traditional dogmatics. Like, none of it is like this is like Catholic stuff. Like, this is not even this is not very radical. Like, this is fundamental to like a really vanilla way of understanding Christianity, is that you don't have to go out of your way to enforce this on other people. And I think that like that even like people cannot manage to be conservative because they're so worried about being spiritual fascists. They want to be that fundamental something that's like so alien to most of Christian history, even the most oppressive, right? Like let's be like Inquisition, whatever. Like take all that. That is less conservative than you are, because it's like you. And I think another thing is that people don't realize that these systems come from the previous systems, but they add to them in exponential ways. So I think like people don't realize, like Jimmy Carter, for instance, right? He gives more money to Israel than any donations in the entire world up until that point in history combined. And when he does that, what they do is they use it to fund annexation of Palestine and and the Gaza Strip. But they also send guns, and the reason that he gave them that money was to give guns to Indonesia, they were enacting a genocide in East Timor. So essentially, there are these patterns of there is a capitalistic superstructure which is getting worse and worse and worse, and the more that you allow that, the more and more complicit you are in that. So regardless of whatever you say about religious past or whatever, I know that a lot of conservative Christians love to talk about like Muslim violence, right, in the Middle East and against Christians and that kind of thing. There is no comparison in terms of the white moderate Christian and their participation in genocide globally, right? I mean, like there just isn't another more dangerous person, because what they do is they allow they vote together, right? So each person's individual vote or individual support, right, doesn't may not mean much, right? But each time that they support it, each time that they participate in the governments that they've chosen to support and put out signs or whatever, they're being complicit in all of those things because they don't participate in it in the same way. So
exactly, yeah, it is. It's complicit and it in so many ways just downright antithetical to the actual message of the gospel, which I would have to argue is quite fundamentally anarchic. You know what I mean?
And also doesn't like war, doesn't like militarized, right? Very, I mean, I think that is the most frustrating thing, because I think that I don't know, like I feel that you probably run into this too, is like it feels very obvious. And so I think at times it gets hard to even explain it, because it's like, where do I begin? Because it's not, because we've gotten so far off base in terms of, and, I'm not even saying, because I think that and I don't want to be like a primitivist in the sense that like someone who's like, simpler times, I think like
right.
That's weird. But like, I think that for me, it's like, you don't even understand the basic nature of what you're participating in now. There is no way that you can get to what you ought to be or what you could be.
Exactly.
And I think that's what's so frustrating about it, is because I feel that discourse hasn't changed in about 200 years. So
just 200 or so may or may not coincide with American society.
I mean, I'm not saying it, but I'm
kind of saying it.
I'm kind of saying it.
All right. Well, my friend, I hate to say this because we are literally just getting rolling, but we've been talking for almost 50 minutes now. So how about let's just make a little deal here that we're going to come back on and have a second conversation about Christianity and capitalism.
That's great. That'd be great.
All right. We'll schedule this once we get off the Zoom here. But is there any way that if people are really like inspired by your thought or would like to connect with you more or maybe ask you some questions, how could folks get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think I have an Instagram. It's private, but I'll accept people. I largely do that for professional purposes.
Right.
But it's Hundunsan is the first three letters of each of my names. So HUNDUNSAN. If you want to email me something longer, HunterDSanders@gmail.com, spelled how it sounds.
Are you on Facebook also?
I'm very much not on Facebook.
Okay.
I have a background photo. It's me and my spouse as my profile picture, and then I have a background of Fidel Castro playing basketball, and I think that is it. That's all I
you've
have.
done.
I'm really going there. So it's just absent. There's nothing there.
So Instagram it is.
Instagram it is. Come find me on Instagram.
All right, perfect. Well, Hunter, thank you so much. You're fabulous. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
As are you. Yeah.
We got to make this happen again. So I will message you after I had to record this next episode I'm recording. I'll message you and we'll set up our capitalism.
Yeah,
chat.
please do. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Have a good day. See you later.
See ya. Bye.
This has been the Conversations Podcast. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions or comments, or just want to get involved, feel free to join the conversation on social media. You can find us at Conversations Official on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And please don't forget to rate, follow, and share this podcast. We're available on Anchor, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining the conversation.